The rising sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the crystal-clear waters of the ocean. The sea breeze carried the distinctive scent of salt air, while the waves gently broke on the golden sand. It was yet another perfect day in the small coastal town, a tropical paradise that attracted tourists from all over the country during the summer. Lindsay walked barefoot along the beach, feeling the warm sand between her toes. Her long blonde hair, slightly wavy from the sea salt, swayed with the gentle breeze. Her tanned skin and honey-coloured eyes reflected her deep connection with the ocean. Wearing only frayed denim shorts and a white tank top over her bikini, she carried a colourful surfboard under her arm. At 25, Lindsay was one of the most sought-after surf instructors in the region. Born and raised there, she knew every wave, every current, and every secret of that sea like the back of her hand. Her passion for surfing was evident in the sparkle of her eyes every time she entered the water. Arriving at the kiosk where she worked, Lindsay greeted her colleagues with a warm smile. The place was simple but cozy, a blue turquoise painted wooden structure decorated with old boards and photos of famous surfers. The scent of sunscreen and board wax filled the air. "Good morning, everyone. Ready for another day of perfect waves?" she asked excitedly, leaning her board against the wall. Her colleagues responded with the same enthusiasm. They formed a close-knit group, almost like a family. They had grown up together on that beach, sharing a passion for the sea and surfing. Lindsay felt blessed to be able to turn her hobby into a profession, teaching others to experience the freedom and adrenaline of gliding over the waves. As she organized the material for her first class of the day, Lindsay reflected on how different her life was during the summer. The quiet town transformed with the arrival of tourists, who brought with them a frenetic and festive energy. The streets became busy, restaurants crowded, and the beaches packed. Lindsay enjoyed the summer's excitement, but she also appreciated the moments of tranquility. Her favorite refuge was a small seaside bar in a more secluded area known only to the locals. It was a simple place, with wooden tables scattered across the sand and a string of lights hanging between the palm trees. There she could relax with friends, away from the hustle and bustle of tourists. That night, after a long day of classes, Lindsay decided to go to the bar with her group of friends. The place was lively, with live music playing hits. The smell of fried fish and drinks lingered in the air, mingling with the sea breeze. Lindsay sat at the rustic counter, ordering a cold beer. She was wearing a light cotton dress with tropical flower prints, her bare feet swinging to the rhythm of the music. She was chatting animatedly with the bartender, a middle-aged man she had known since childhood when the atmosphere of the bar subtly changed. A noisy group of young people entered the establishment, attracting curious and some suspicious glances from the regulars. They were clearly tourists, too tanned, too new clothes, speaking loudly about the wonders of the city. Lindsay observed the group discreetly, noticing how they seemed out of place in that environment so familiar to her. It was when one of the guys separated from the group and walked towards her. He was tall, with messy brown hair and piercing green eyes. He wore an open floral shirt over a white t-shirt and khaki shorts. "Hi, could you tell me why everyone is staring at me and my friends?" he whispered charmingly, leaning slightly towards Lindsay. She stared at him for a moment, considering how to respond. There was something captivating about his smile, a mix of confidence and vulnerability that intrigued her. "Well, I don't know if you noticed, but this isn't a bar for tourists. It's a place to meet up with friends," Lindsay replied, getting up from the stool. She walked towards the outside of the bar, where some of her friends were chatting around a small fire in the sand. To her surprise, the young man followed her. "Don't let that stop you," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Johnny. Now that you know me, we can be friends," he added with a charming smile. Lindsay hesitated for a moment, but something about the sincerity in Johnny's eyes made her return the gesture. "Lindsay," she introduced herself, shaking his hand. As the night went on, and against all of Lindsay's initial expectations, she found herself completely absorbed in the conversation with Johnny. He was a great listener, asking insightful questions about her life in the coastal town and her work as a surf instructor. Lindsay surprised herself by speaking enthusiastically about her passion for the sea, describing the indescribable feeling of catching the perfect wave, the adrenaline rush of challenging the forces of nature. Johnny listened with genuine interest, his green eyes fixed on her, as if he were mesmerized by every word. They danced to the sound of live music, laughed at shared stories, and for a few hours, Lindsay completely forgot that Johnny was a tourist. There was an undeniable connection between them, a chemistry she hadn't experienced in a long time. When the night came to an end, Lindsay felt a twinge of disappointment. Part of her wanted that moment to last longer, but her reason reminded her of the countless times she saw friends get hurt by getting involved with tourists. "Let's meet tomorrow, what do you think? Give me your phone number and—" Johnny began to say, but Lindsay gently interrupted him. "Hey, Johnny, tonight was really fun. You seem like a nice guy, but I have a rule about not getting involved with tourists," she explained, trying to sound firm despite the internal conflict she felt. "You come, spend a week, have fun, capture the hearts of local girls, and then you go back to your real lives, and we usually end up with broken hearts. So, I think it's better if we say goodbye here." Johnny seemed genuinely disappointed, but he respected Lindsay's decision. They said their goodbyes with a friendly handshake, and Lindsay watched as he rejoined his friends. The next morning, Lindsay arrived early at the beach for her first class of the day. The sun had barely risen and the sand was still cool beneath her feet. She took a deep breath, smelling the familiar scent of the sea, trying to push away thoughts of the previous night and the charming tourist she had met. As other instructors arrived, they began to prepare the equipment for the lessons. Lindsay was checking the boards when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Hello, Lindsay. I booked lessons with you for the next few days. As my instructor, do you agree to meet with me?" She turned, surprised, to find Johnny smiling, accompanied by his friends. They were all dressed in swimwear, clearly ready for a surfing lesson. "You're persistent, huh?" Lindsay replied, unable to suppress a smile. The following mornings were spent with Lindsay teaching Johnny and his friends the basics of surfing. Johnny seemed to struggle even with the most basic concepts. He stumbled on the sand while carrying the board, had trouble paddling, and could barely stand in the water. Lindsay couldn't deny that she found his determination adorable. Despite the falls and the splutters with salt water, Johnny kept his good humor and continued trying. She found herself laughing at his antics and appreciating how he didn't take himself too seriously. Between surfing attempts, they talked. Johnny kept asking for a date, but Lindsay held her ground, reminding herself that he was just a passing tourist. However, it was undeniable that there was a growing attraction between them. On the last day of class, Lindsay felt a pang of sadness, realizing she probably wouldn't see Johnny again. Against her better judgment, she found herself extending an invitation. "Hey, Johnny, there's an amateur surfing competition here at this beach tomorrow. How about you come by?" she asked, surprising even herself with the invitation. Johnny's face lit up for a moment, but then his expression turned to one of disappointment. "Wow, Lindsay, I'd love to, but I have a commitment tomorrow," he replied, looking genuinely upset. Lindsay felt a mix of confusion and disappointment. After so much insistence, he was refusing an invitation from her. She said goodbye to Johnny and his friends, trying not to show how affected she was. On the morning of the championship, Lindsay arrived early at the beach. The place was a true spectacle, with colourful flags fluttering in the wind, sponsor tents scattered across the sand, and a stage set up for the awards. Surfers of all ages were warming up at the water's edge, while spectators, a mix of locals and tourists, settled on the sand. Lindsay joined her friends, all excited about the event. She tried to focus on the conversations and the excitement of the championship, but couldn't help occasionally looking at the crowd, secretly hoping to see a familiar face. The championship heats began, and Lindsay found herself swept up in the energy of the event. She cheered for her friends who were competing, shouted with excitement at every well-executed maneuver, and thrilled at the camaraderie atmosphere among the surfers. It was during the announcement of a new batch of competitors that something caught Lindsay's attention. Among the announced names was Johnny's. In disbelief, she watched as he ran to the sea, confidently grabbing his board. What followed left Lindsay speechless. Johnny surfed with a skill and grace she could never have imagined based on his lessons. He caught the waves with precision, executed maneuvers, and demonstrated total control over the board. When Johnny came out of the sea, Lindsay approached him, who was grinning broadly, clearly satisfied with his performance. "You completely fooled me by pretending not to know how to swim," she said, a mix of amusement and feigned fury in her voice. Johnny laughed, running his hand through his wet hair. "Well, when we said goodbye after that first night, I knew I needed to find a way to see you again. And what better way to have your full attention than to be your student?" he explained, his charming smile back on his face. Lindsay shook her head, impressed by Johnny's ingenuity and persistence. She didn't know if she should be irritated or flattered by the effort he had made to spend more time with her. The tournament continued, and Johnny ended up winning the amateur category. When he stepped down from the podium, holding his trophy, his eyes immediately searched for Lindsay in the crowd. "Don't you think I at least deserve a hug for my achievement?" he asked, approaching her with a contagious smile. Lindsay hesitated for a moment, but the joy of the moment melted her last defenses. She threw herself into his arms, and before she could think twice, their lips met in a passionate kiss. The kiss was interrupted by the cheers and whistles from Lindsay's friends, who watched the scene with mocking smiles. Blushing, but unable to hold back her smile, Lindsay suggested they go celebrate at the bar where they had first met. The bar was lively as always, with loud music and the smell of food in the air. Lindsay and Johnny sat at a secluded table, their knees touching under the rustic wood. They talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories, the connection between them stronger than ever. As the night wore on, however, a shadow seemed to fall over Johnny's mood. He took Lindsay's hand across the table, his face suddenly serious. "Lindsay, tomorrow I'm leaving, but I didn't want this between us to end," and he began. But Lindsay gently interrupted him. "Johnny, I've already heard stories from friends who believed in this tale, Johnny," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. "They waited for the charming prince to remember them, but it never happened. When you go back to your life, you won't even remember me, or you'll remember me as a holiday fling." Johnny tried to argue, but Lindsay held her ground. They enjoyed the rest of the night together, dancing, talking, but when it was time to say goodbye, there was a melancholy in the air that neither could deny. The following week was difficult for Lindsay. She tried to focus on her work, on her friends, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Johnny. She found herself looking at the sea, recalling the sparkle in his eyes while he was surfing, the sound of his laughter, the touch of his hands. Lindsay felt frustrated with herself. This was exactly what she had always tried to avoid, falling in love with a tourist and having her heart broken when he left. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get Johnny out of her thoughts. It was another sunny morning when Lindsay arrived at the kiosk to work. Her boss called her as soon as she walked in. "You have a student for today," he informed her, handing her a clipboard with the lesson information. Sighing, Lindsay took her board and walked to the beach. She liked her job, but at that moment all she wanted was to be alone with her thoughts. However, when she reached the designated meeting point, her heart almost stopped. Standing on the sand, holding a surfboard, and smiling that smile that had won her heart, was Johnny. For a moment, Lindsay thought she was hallucinating, that the strong sun had affected her mind in some way. But then Johnny walked towards her, and before she could say anything, he wrapped her in his arms. They kissed right there, on the sand, to the sound of the waves crashing on the beach. When they finally pulled apart, Johnny held Lindsay's face in his hands, his green eyes shining with emotion. "I told you I wouldn't forget you, Lindsay. I didn't get you out of my mind for even a minute all week," he said, his voice full of sincerity. Lindsay looked at him, still incredulous. "But how? Why?" she managed to stammer. Johnny smiled, caressing her face with his thumb. I left everything behind. My job, my apartment, everything. I knew I couldn't let you slip away. Not when I finally found someone who makes me feel so alive, so complete. Tears of happiness began to form in Lindsay's eyes. Are you serious? You're staying? She asked, hardly daring to believe. I'm very serious, Johnny replied, kissing her again. I'm going to live our tropical fairy tale, Lindsay. If you'll have me, of course. Lindsay laughed, a sound of pure joy. Well, I guess I'll have to teach you how to really surf now, she joked, wrapping her arms around his neck. I can't wait to get started, Johnny replied, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. There, with the rising sun painting the sky in vibrant colours, the waves gently breaking on the shore, and the man she was in love with by her side, Lindsay felt that she would finally live her own fairy tale, and this adventure was just beginning, and she could hardly wait to see where this new wave would take her. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.